It's 6 p.m. on a brand new Monday here in Korea. Welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let's start with the headlines. Despite strong opposition and concerns by the New Politics Alliance for Democracy, the Korea-China Free Trade Pact finally passed the Assembly's plenary session today. Korea's GDP rebounded strongly in the July to September period from the gloomy digits recorded in the second quarter. In stark contrast, output across all industries in October marks the biggest decline since January. Following NIS reports of a failed SLBM launch by North Korea, the Defense Ministry says Seoul and Washington are closely watching Pyongyang's test launches. UN Security Council resolutions prohibit any type of ballistic missile development or launch by the regime. South Korea's parliament has this afternoon finally ratified the Korea-China Free Trade Agreement. With Monday's vote, the deal passed the Assembly some 6 months after being submitted for ratification. For details, let's connect to our Park Jiwon standing by the National Assembly. Jiwon, this has been a long time coming.
Daniel, the Korea-China Free Trade Pact passed the Assembly's plenary session about an hour ago this afternoon, along with FTAs with Vietnam and New Zealand, in a bill to create a free trade zone with Turkey in service and investment sectors. While the ruling Saenuri Party has been pushing the free trade agreement for the past few months, the main opposition NPAD resisted because of concerns for the nation's farming sector, which will be hard hit by the pact. The Liberal Party earlier said they wouldn't back down until a reasonable amount of compensation was available. But with a marathon session of negotiations over the weekend, both parties finally agreed to create a fund worth about $1 billion for farmers, along with other measures to compensate the agricultural sector.
Good to hear that the local agriculture sector will not suffer. Jiwon, now that it's ratified, when will the FTA take effect in both countries?
Well, Daniel, the rival party and the government hastened the process and said the trade deal will take effect within this year. But actually, more procedures are needed from both countries, so it's not yet precisely clear when it will take effect. With the ratification process done in the Korean parliament, it needs to be approved at cabinet level, followed by its official proclamation into law. The Korean government will then give notice to the Chinese government that domestic procedures are complete. Then the State Council of China approves the agreement. While two governments will set a start date, the Chinese government also has to promulgate the pact. Experts say China's domestic procedures will decide exactly when the mega trade pact comes into effect. Well, that's it for now, and I will have more updates in our later newscast. Daniel.
Looking forward to it, Jiwon. Thank you for that report. Staying on trade deals now, members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership or TPP agreement will seal the deal at a signing ceremony in New Zealand in early February. Korea's Deputy Trade Minister Woo Tae-hee said in a briefing on Monday that participating countries will complete scrutinizing the world's biggest trade pact within the first week of December. While the full text was only released this month, Korean officials were actually reviewing the agreement since May. It turns out the Korean economy fared relatively well in the third quarter in comparison to many other major economies. According to OECD data, Korea's GDP grew 1.2% on quarter in the July to September period, a strong rebound from the second quarter when the Korean economy expanded a mere 0.3% compared to the previous three-month period. In contrast, growth slowed in many OECD countries, all the way down to 0.4% from 1% in the previous quarter in the case of the U.S. Third quarter growth are slowed in Britain and other EU nations as well. Korea's overall industrial output slumped by the biggest margin in 9 months in October. The drop is largely linked to sluggish exports, which are also hurting manufacturers' sentiments. Hwang Ji-hye has the numbers.
Statistics Korea says output across all industries was down 1.3% in October from a month earlier. That marks the first drop in 5 months and the biggest decline since January this year, when the figure dropped 1.9%. The agency attributed the slump to a drop in production in the mining and manufacturing sectors that were hit hard by slumping outbound shipments. Exports have dropped every month this year, and in October, they plunged nearly 16%, posting the biggest decline since the height of the global financial crisis some 6 years ago. Such gloomy data is directly reflected in how businesses are seeing economic conditions. The Bank of Korea says its manufacturers' business sentiment index for November came in at 68, down 3 points from a month earlier. A reading under 100 means pessimists outnumber optimists. But every cloud has a silver lining. On the back of government-led measures to boost domestic demand, retail sales rose 3.1% in October from the previous month, the biggest rise in nearly 5 years. The boosted spending also pushed up output in the service sector by 0.2%. While the finance ministry cites the slowing Chinese economy and the recent terror attacks in Paris as lingering uncertainties for the local economy, it expects the recovery momentum in spending to continue for the time being. The Korean economy grew 2.4% in the first 3 quarters of this year from a year earlier, higher than the OECD average of 2.1%. 황지혜, Arirang News.
2 operations led by Kakao and KT were awarded preliminary licenses to begin web-based banking services. Shin Se-min explains how the first direct banks of Korea can benefit everyday lives of online bank users.
Korea's mobile messenger giant Kakao and number 2 telecom operator KT Corporation are set to launch internet-only banking services next year, free of online financial services, no branches, and no tellers. It's an unprecedented move that could take the finance market by storm.
We're expecting customers to enjoy cheaper and convenient financial services with an introduction of such internet-only banks.
The internet-only banks come with 2 major benefits: higher interest rates as operators cut costs of running offline offices, and middle interest loans for small borrowers. Currently, top-tier banks offer annual interest rates of up to nearly 5%, while secondary financial institutions, including savings banks and non-bank lenders, charge interest rates of up to 34%. Internet banks say they can better evaluate creditworthiness of the lenders based on compiled big data like location and e-commerce transitions and better suit them with the mid-range interest loans. Another big benefit is convenience. KT's K-Bank is teaming up with 20 other companies including Uri Bank, Hyundai Securities, GS Retail, and Alipay. Some 23,000 ATMs in Uri Bank and GS Retail's convenience stores will offer offline direct banking services to its online customers. Alipay, China's largest third-party payment system operated by Alibaba Group, will help users with simple overseas transfers. Another internet-only bank, Kakao Bank, is expected to roll out differentiated services that can reach customers via its Kakao platform, providing direct mobile brochures and cheaper customer services. Experts say it's a big step forward and one that's been needed amid a long slump in the banking industry, and it's been making possible with less red tape.
By lowering the entry barrier for banks, more competition is expected in the financial circle. But that's also a plus for the consumers, as it gives them more option to choose from.
The 2 internet-only banks have to apply for the final approval from the Financial Services Commission for them to start operation within the next 6 months. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
North Korea has test-fired a submarine-launched ballistic missile over the weekend. But according to South Korea's spy agency, the launch attempt was a failure, and it happened with their leader Kim Jong-un watching. Kim Hyun-bin has the details.
South Korea's National Intelligence Service told lawmakers on Monday that North Korea test-fired an SLBM on Saturday off the east coast city of Wonsan. But they added the launch is viewed as a failure, as the missile trajectory could not be traced. The NIS remarks indicate Pyongyang has yet to master sought-after missile technology. The agency added that the North's leader, Kim Jong-un, is presumed to have watched over the failed launch. South Korea's defense ministry says Seoul and Washington are closely watching North Korea's test launches, adding that the recent launch contravenes UN Security Council resolutions.
UN Security Council resolutions prohibit any type of ballistic missile development or launch by North Korea, and Seoul and Washington are closely watching Pyongyang's movements.
In May, North Korea claimed it had successfully launched an SLBM, but analysts say that as it flew only 150 meters, the test was more about ejection than a launch. The NIS says they were able to trace the path of the trajectory at that time. This recent test fire comes a little more than a week before the two Koreas are set to hold vice ministerial talks at the Kaesong Joint Industrial Park on December 11th. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Top nuclear envoys from South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. are scheduled to hold a two-day meeting in Washington on Monday to discuss Pyongyang's nuclear program. This is the first meeting outside the six-party member talks in 7 months between the three countries. Korea's Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs, Hwang Jun-guk, will lead the Seoul delegation. U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Policy Sung Kim and Japan's head of the Foreign Ministry's Asian and Oceania Affairs Bureau, Kimihiro Ishikane, are expected to represent their respective countries. The three representatives may hold separate bilateral talks. Turning back to domestic politics, Korea's main opposition party is in the grips of an internal power struggle that's pushing it further into turmoil. The strife intensified when former New Politics Alliance for Democracy co-chairman An Cheol-soo refused a three-way joint leadership proposal from NPAD chairman Moon Jae-in. Moon's plan would see him, An, and Seoul Mayor Park Won-soon leading the party. Instead, An has proposed a special national convention to elect a new leader for the Liberal Party. He says it could add new momentum to the party's reform efforts and help ease factional feuds. Moon says he is still deciding whether to accept An's proposal. President Park Geun-hye is in Paris for a critical UN climate conference where leaders are seeking agreement on a new global approach to climate change. In a speech to the conference, the president will outline Korea's efforts to counter climate change and lay out how Korea intends to meet its own ambitious targets. Hwang Sung-hee reports from Paris.
President Park arrived in Paris on Sunday to attend the UN Climate Change Conference. She'll be received by French President François Hollande and UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon at Monday's opening ceremony. Here, President Park will address some 140 heads of state.
Through her keynote speech, President Park will join international efforts for the launch of a new climate system. She will also explain Korea's efforts to counter climate change by proposing a target for emissions reductions and contribution to the Green Climate Fund.
Previously, the UN-led talks focused on haggling over the developed world's targets for emissions reductions. But this year, they emphasize action by all countries. All participants submitted national climate change plans ahead of time, known as intended nationally determined contributions. Korea has set the ambitious goal of slashing greenhouse gas emissions by 37% by 2030. As an end product of this year's meeting, world leaders are aiming to achieve a successor treaty to the 1997 Kyoto Protocol. Korea's presidential office says the global climate talks will be an opportunity for Korea to assert itself as a middle power, as it will serve as a bridge between advanced and developing nations. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News, Paris.
In the lead-up to the conference, police and protesters clashed in Paris as a few hundred people turn out for a previously planned climate march despite a blanket ban on demonstrations following the terror attacks in the French capital. Kwon Jang-ho has details.
Peaceful environmental demonstrations descended into violence as about 200 anti-capitalists and anarchists in masks became involved in a mass brawl with police. The incident occurred in the main Paris square where tributes had been laid for the victims who died in the Paris shootings just over 2 weeks ago. Flowers were trampled and candles are said to have been thrown. Over 100 people were arrested and climate activists were quick to distance themselves from those involved. But for the French government, it was justification for the controversial decision to cancel the planned climate change march.
This is why these protests are not authorised. We knew there would be troublemakers who, by the way, have nothing to do with climate activists or those who want the conference to succeed and who are there only to create problems.
Earlier in the day, there was little sign of what was to come. An installation of about 10,000 pairs of shoes was placed in Paris's main square in a symbolic protest to the cancelled climate change march. The shoes included those donated by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and Pope Francis. There was also another symbolic demonstration where hundreds of people linked arms to form a human chain along the route of the cancelled march. A gap in the chain was left in front of the Bataclan concert hall, where 89 were killed in the November 13 attacks. Elsewhere around the world, an estimated 570,000 people took part in some 2,500 demonstrations, all peacefully. The largest took place in London, where about 50,000 people marched in front of the Houses of Parliament. Almost 1,000 people also took part in a march in Seoul, organised by Greenpeace Korea. The importance of this conference was reiterated by President Hollande and UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, who held a separate meeting on Sunday before the conference. A spokesman said they agreed failure to reach an agreement was not an option and would have disastrous consequences. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories, South Korea has been elected as a council member of International Maritime Organization for its 8th consecutive term. According to the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries on Monday, its re-election as one of 10 Category A nations that best provide international shipping services came during the organization's 29th Assembly in London last week. The IMO is a United Nations agency responsible for regulating and shaping shipping and related maritime affairs. That's all for now. Thank you for watching. More coming up at 10 p.m. Korea time.